growing within our industry. And so we're going to be hearing about strategies for enhancing safety and reducing costs. And our keynote speaker today is Sylvia Washington. She is an HR consultant with all things HR and a senior HR consultant for that matter. So Sylvia, please, we are so happy to have you today. Go ahead and share your screen and I'll go ahead and get out of this here. There we go. You should be able to share yours there. There you are.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to hear about this summit. I might want to join. So I think I will, because I think there's some good information being shared. Thanks so much for having me here today. This is for those of you who were at the governor's conference, this is the presentation that I did last 2 weeks ago. And it is about really making sure that we're, really managing our seasonal and temporary workers. So a little bit about me. I have been in human resources for a long time. I've worked in a lot of different types of industries. In HR, sometimes safety comes under our umbrella. So that's how I really got involved with the safety, not only in my regular job, but my husband and I also had our own construction company. And hearing the stories that you just shared about fatalities makes me remember how lucky we were, and also how important safety was for our workers, because we never had a fatality. Doesn't mean we didn't have challenges and accidents. And I'll tell you, fall protection was the biggest challenge to get our workers to wear correctly. So that's the plug I'm going to put for fall protection and how important that is. But anyway, I've been in HR for many years, and I'm sharing with you some of the things that I think are important when we're managing temporary and seasonal workers, because not only in construction do we have seasonal workers, but in a lot of other industries. So I'm going to talk today about the cost to employers from those incidents with temporary and seasonal workers, about strategies if you're going to work with temporary agencies, how to set up a realistic safety program for your seasonal and temporary workers, and what are some of the challenges we have for our program implementation. So I think you all know this. We have costs to our employers for seasonal and temporary workers. They're still the same probably for regular employees, but just remember, we've got our wage and productivity losses, administrative expenses, medical expenses, worker comp increases in our rates due to incidents. But then there's all the indirect cost. Is that, do we have time loss due to work stoppage? Do we have damage to tools and equipment? Do we have to find a replacement worker? Do we lose productivity? So incidents and accidents cost money. Right? And so it's really understanding for our own industry what those costs are. So the top industries for seasonal workers are retail and hospitality. Think about retail, we're coming into the holiday season. So again, we see the different companies like Amazon and how many more workers they're going to be hiring. Hospitality, same thing. There's seasonality with tourism and other things that cause the rise and fall. There's outdoor recreation. So getting ready for ski season. So we have, seasonal workers that work up at this, ski, up at the ski resorts. Agriculture, big one for seasonal workers, the ebbs and flows of agriculture, tourism, even event planning. So think about all those conventions that come to town that are kind of really based on, seasonality. And then, of course, delivery and logistics. This is where we, again, that kind of goes with those ebbs and flows with retail and such, and agriculture that will have more seasonal workers. When we talk about temporary workers, this came out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Production and transportation rely the most heavily on temporary workers. And think about those industries and how much incidents can happen in those types of industries for people who may not be properly trained. So again, looking at, your need for temporary workers, what are you relying most heavily on, and are you set up to make them successful and safe? So I'm going to give you some statistics. So this was from ProPublica, who actually did a study with a couple of states on workers' comp claims over a 5-year period. I think it was like 2015 to 2020. And they found that the incident rate of temporary worker industries was between 36% and 72% higher than the non-temporary workers. right? And so that's a big increase. And if you group them by occupation, it was mostly those blue collar, more dangerous occupations other than like office workers. So what's interesting is that temporary workers are often clustered in high risk act classification. They're also 68% more likely than non-temporary workers to be working at those 20% occupations with the highest industry rates. So, seasonality fishing, one of the highest incident rates of construction up there. So think about how we're putting temporary employees and seasonal workers kind of a little bit in harm's way that we need to be mindful of. So you mentioned Sharp earlier, and this is actually, I thought, was a great snapshot about what Sharp had done as a study of in our own state of workers' comp rates around temporary workers, and they found that claim rates were twice as permanent workers in comparable occupations. Those high-risk occupations were agricultural, vehicle operation, construction, and machine operation. So again, these are, things that we think about. Oh, I need a temporary worker to work in my manufacturing plant, and I'm going to put them in front of this machine that they have to operate but I don't really provide the training or safety training that they need to be successful. There were lower claim rates, what I thought was interesting, in warehousing. So what is warehousing doing that's different? Well, probably what they do is they don't put everybody on a forklift right away, right? We don't let people get on forklifts usually until they've been certified to be on a forklift. So it's really making sure that we, again, look at what we're doing with temporary and seasonal workers and what types of work we're having them do. And the findings were, again, twice the rate of time loss claims. Time loss, our biggest driver of workers' comp rates, and again, yes, we're in a some of us are in a retro program, and that helps because we've got combined experience and we're very active on return to work. But there are going to still be, I kept on telling you, but there's still going to be time loss. And so the gap of agreeing that gap rate of claim rate is actually greater again in those high hazard sectors. And what was interesting too is that the analysis of the multiple skeletal disorders, so back pain and knee pain and things like that, had higher claim rates than their peers in both categories. And other findings that this chart found was they reported similar or lower exposures than their permanent peers were on their rates. So their exposure to those multiple skeletal hazards was the highest risk, followed by machinery and falls. So when we think about how the work is done, right? Are we making sure that they're doing it ergonomically the way they should? Are they doing proper lifting? Are they, or they know how to, I worked for a client that our biggest industry was our technicians stepping off the ladder and hurting their knees. Right. So, how do we do ladder training so that people know how to get off the ladder without hurting themselves? So, and then the temporary workers that study said they felt less prepared, right? Because, they didn't have maybe the experience or the training or even control over the task. So Sharp made these recommendations. The prevention must include training. Okay. And but then they said it's really important when you're working with younger workers or less experienced workers, you can't assume that they know how to do things. And, and then you may add in also what's not in the findings here about people who are English as a second language. Do we have to, really make sure that they understand things for safety? Do we, again, I love that L&I has now put, more of their things in Spanish and hopefully other languages, because that helps us to be able to help people to understand what the safety requirements are. You should do the training before you actually have them do the work, and it needs to continue. And there needs to be an increased safety focus when they're placing those high-risk industries. So construction, manufacturing, agriculture, what are you doing for the safety focus for temporary workers? I have a client that I worked with that did it in manufacturing, and they used, temporary workers quite a lot. And they did do a safety orientation, but I'm not sure it was totally effective because they still had injuries with temporary workers. So I think what we looked through like that what we were doing is that making sure we'd only put them in certain types of work. So for instance, they weren't on forklifts, they weren't operating saws and things like that. We really had them doing things with hand tools and or maybe in the warehousing area where we had kind of less risk for injury. So here's the money. So I love that OSHA has this little thing, a calculator on their website, because I think if you're trying to, as a safety officer or human resources or operations manager, you're trying to get the attention of your ownership that safety matters, safety costs money. Well, here's how it costs money, right? So just using our $100,000 in payroll, which will give us that 1570 in workers' comp premiums, we have a 3% profit margin, and we get 2 workplace injuries, right? So we've got our direct costs, which is the payment, the wages, the medical expense, legal services, our indirect costs, which is that training, investigation, lost productivity, maybe we have to repair equipment. So we need over $500,000 to cover those two injuries. So I think if you're trying to get some attention of money that you need to spend for safety or things you have to change in your safety program, this can be a really nice way to be able to catch the attention of the people with the pocketbook. And I just learned, and what I've learned in my career is in human resources, because I was never a revenue generating department, is that I really had to show how we had to spend money to make money. So this is one way you can actually go and say, this is how we can increase our profitability if we control those injuries. So we have a staffing organization with us today, and maybe more, but again, if you're using a staffing organization, these are some of the things to think about, and also that are required, because L&I actually has a safety standard for protecting temporary workers. This is the linkage, but if you just type in temporary workers under a safety rule, this will come up. And there's 2 sections. There's one section for the host employer and the other section of what the temporary agency needs to do. And so in the following slides, and this was put into place in October 2022, OSHA Federal had the standard prior, and then so they pretty much adopted that standard. So that's what we're going to go through in the next group of slides. It's really about joint responsibility, right? We both, as a staffing agency and host employer, are jointly responsible for that safe environment. So we got to have the training. We have to have OSHA, hazard communication and record keeping requirements. And I always thought it was interesting when that manufacturing company I worked with, my client, whenever there was an injury, there was always like, who reports it on their OSHA 300 form, right? Is it the host employer, the staffing agency, or both? Right? Because OSHA could hold both of you responsible, right? So especially if there's something that regards in serious injury or death, so it's making sure that we know that we have that joint responsibility. When you're assessing your staffing company, making sure that, you're having a meeting with them. What's your process to evaluate candidates for our qualifications? 45 openings is a lot of openings. So to expect your staffing company to get you somebody tomorrow may not be a reasonable expectation in our current candidate climate, and then we just don't always have the workers available. So it's really about, what's the evaluation for candidates? Are you going to interview them? Are you just going to, are you going to rely on them to evaluate them? What safety program does the staffing company do for themselves for general safety prior to placing them on assignment? And here's an important piece. If you require pre-employment drug testing, include and make sure they do as well. So that manufacturing company that I'm using as my example, using those temporaries, had a new temporary start, and they do pre-employment drug testing for regular workers, but not for the staffing agency. And luckily, this particular situation did not result. What happened was the worker went into one of the single-use bathrooms and proceeded to overdose and pass away. Very sad situation. FBI was involved, police and all of that. So it wasn't necessarily an OSHA thing, but it's still like something to say that, well, let's make sure if we're going to be putting people on our job site and we drug test before we have them come on, then we should make sure the safety agency is doing as well. So let's talk about some best practices. Prior to signing or writing a contract, making sure you're evaluating all the facets of their program related to the temporary workers that you're going to be hiring. Does your staffing agency have the right risk classification codes? Okay, they may have to add them. Does they provide them with the safety data of your program that will allow them to evaluate you? Okay, because staffing companies are doing, I hear that a lot of them do a lot of work for safety. They want their workers to be safe. So they want to make sure that they're sending them out, they're putting them into a safe workplace. Do a joint risk assessment, do a site visit. So maybe we're going through the tasks that you're going to assign to the temporary worker. So the staffing company who's going to be, picking workers can see how the work is done. I was a staff, I worked at the beginning of my HR career, I worked at a staffing agency, and this was so helpful for me because I did light manufacturing and, light industrial and warehouse. And so not always knowing how work was done, I always did that site visit to know how the work was done. So I could explain it to employees. I could make sure that we talked about, how it's safely being done and, and really be able to find the right fit. Do they have written job descriptions? You should. Okay. If not, if you don't have a written job description, make sure that you have something you can provide to the staffing company to help them to provide the best workers. What are the exposures? Is it a lot of noise? Do you have to do the hearing assessment test? The hearing thing. Do you have to have a respirator fit? Is it just working outside in all kinds of weather? What are those exposures you make sure that you're covering? And maybe your job hazard analyses that you've done. Okay, so these are things to go through with your agency and what equipment and machinery are they going to be operating. Other best practices, making sure you pair your temporary worker with a regular employee as a mentor or a trainer. So, and make sure that you pick the right regular employee, that they understand that this is a big responsibility, that they have, you're doing this because you're the best person to do this job, to train someone to show them how to do the work correctly and to do it safely. Workplace incidents, making sure that temporary workers know they can report accidents without fear of reprisal. One of the findings that I was reading about was how temporary workers will underreport because they don't want to lose the job. Right. So they might not tell the host employer, they may not tell the staffing agent because they want to keep working. Okay. And so really about making sure that people know that we want you to report when something happens. We want to keep you safe. What is that process when something happens, when incident occurs, so if somebody gets hurt, we're going to send them to the Concentra clinic or the urgent care clinic. What's that? What's the process? And then making sure you do a joint investigation for root causes. So just all the things you do for your analysis on incidents, you're going to still do, but you're going to do it in partnership with your staffing agency. And if you do change tasks, making sure that you are notifying the staffing company and can receive confirmation that they can perform that new task. So, again, it's that extra step to make sure that everybody's involved when you're using temporary workers through an agency. So what needs to be done? Communication, all right? To ensure that we have those protections are provided. Your staffing agent is going to ask you about the conditions. They must ensure that they're setting their workers into a safe workplace. So one of the things, part of this is really about training managers to make sure that they know that they need to tell, to be honest and truthful about what's happening in the workplace, that they don't take it as like somebody's getting into my business by asking questions. The staffing agency has a duty to ask that question. They don't need to be experts on your hazards, but they should be able to determine what conditions exist and what may be encountered and how to best ensure protection. So by knowing that joint analysis, they can talk to the temporary worker before they send them out and making sure that they understand the rules they need to follow, how they report, and how to stay safe. And then they can inquire with your temporary worker, has this been happening? Are you, is everything, safe to what we talked about? Has it turned out to be the way that you thought that what I told you it would be? And host employers treat temporary workers like any other workers, right? In terms of training and safety and health protections. They're still workers. They're just being paid by someone else or through an agency, right? But they're still working at your site. So how do we really put a safety plan in place for temporary and seasonal workers? Because it may be, it's going to be maybe a condensed version of what you do for everyone else, but it's still important. So really just understand what's happening at your workplace, right? So we know that there's hazardous conditions and there's hazard practices. I like the weed analysis here because the root causes are really kind of the meat of assessment, right? Because again, yes, we can have poor housekeeping. Yes, we can have people who, I love the horseplay term. We have people who don't report and things like that. But the reason why is why aren't we reporting? Well, we don't have we don't have safety leadership. We might have managers who are more focused on getting the work done than making sure it's done safely, right? So it's really making sure we understand our workplace to be able to put something in place for those temporary workers. You all know this as safety professionals. The accident is an unforeseen event, act of God, but we know that when we talk about workplace incidents, they are really more predictable. Starting with the pyramid of unsafe acts or at-risk behaviors, are you analyzing your near misses? We have first aid, we have recordable, we have fatality. Because again, talking about the unfortunate example of the fall protection, we could have done all those things, but he still probably would have had an injury that could have been fatal, but it may not have been had we, if there could have been things that could have been done, right? So it's really about, I think the thing that we all know is that if we look at unsafe acts and near misses, we're going to really reduce those other injuries. So that incidence is the unplanned event. It may disrupt the work process and may not result in injury damage. It really needs to be looked at that wake-up call, right? So, and it's understanding that, when we have these, situations where we have those near misses and we have horseplay and all of that, is remembering that we can discipline people. And this is my HR stuff talking, is we can discipline people for not following safety stuff. I always had managers push back. Well, I can't write them up for getting, for this happening. It's like, oh, yes, you can, if they didn't follow the process that led to the injury that they had been trained on. So making sure that we really follow up with employees about when something happens to make sure that we can, do that prevention piece. So preparation is key. So don't wait until it's like, oh my God, the tourists are coming and I need to have, or the crops coming in and I need to prepare my plan. The off season or slow production period is when you get ready. So for those of you who are maybe in agriculture and things are, kind of winding down, that's like plan for, okay, let's assess what happened this last year. What do we need to change? How can we make it better for our seasonal workers? The job hazard analysis right there, that form is right on LNI. It's a real LNI website. It's a nice, simple form to be able to use to assess your hazards. And really, and I really like to really hone in on this appropriate task. Not everything should be done by the temporary worker, right? Sometimes it needs to be that's done by the regular employee that's more trained and does it more often. So it's really about looking at the work and deciding what is appropriate for the temporary or seasonal worker to do from a safety perspective. Because again, what if it was like with the scissor lift situation? One was a regular worker, one was a temporary worker. Should it have been the temporary worker that was on that scissor lift if they didn't have a lot of experience on how to do that? So most common reason for injuries is going to be lifting objects. I think we all know that, okay? Lifting properly, or even how we have things situated for lifting, operating equipment, repetitive tasks, right? So again, in manufacturing, a lot of repetitive tasks, depending on how your production is set up. Slips and falls, car accidents. So now we're seeing more of the car accidents because we have all these seasonal and temporary workers that are delivering, that logistics, deliveries, right? So now and then we have the Puget Sound area where we have lots of accidents and lots of traffic. So again, these are some that are becoming more common for injuries. So things to consider. Are you hiring your seasonal or temporary workers directly or through an agency? Because you can always hire them directly. But what will your training look like? What is that safety orientation? Right? Are you going to do specific training for tools and machinery? Do you need to do specific training for seasonal safety? So one of my clients hires a lot of seasonal workers. And so we had to do, and so what we did this spring is we did our heat illness and wildfire smoke prevention training in, we had safety day, right? So we actually did all company meeting, did safety training, and covered those requirements. And I kudos to LNI. Great training materials, used exactly what they provided. It worked great, right? So don't think you have to create things from scratch, because LNI has really enhanced their training materials that I would promote that you would use. And who will do the training, right? So you need to make sure that you give somebody that responsibility to do that training. Is it managers? Is it someone else? We actually had at the safety day, we had the volunteer fire department come out and do the fire extinguisher training. So again, there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that training happens. And again, just it's spending the time and yes, the money to pay people to come for safety day or safety training when you're hiring maybe a big group of seasonal or temporary workers. But it is really about keeping it simple. Too many steps, people are going to follow it. They're going to do shortcuts. But you need to make sure you review the safety requirements for the positions, how to report accidents, near misses and hazards, emergency plan procedures, and first aid kits. It's like the minimum, right? What can be easier to do is, yes, you can create a checklist, for the manager and the seasonal employee to complete. However, you inspect what you expect, because sometimes managers will rush through that, right? And just, to check off the box. So make sure that we understand that the manager has that responsibility to do a thorough safety training if you're going to have managers do it. So what can be our challenges to a successful program? Well, first and foremost, not considering safety as a profit center. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, safety generates savings. Okay, if we analyze our work process for safety, we can also maybe find a more work efficient process. Workers are more productive if they know they're working in a safe environment. And here's another thing, and this happened with one of my clients. We had to turn into the for contracts, we had to give them our experience factor, right, every year, and we actually had to write a letter to stay to get the contract as to why it had gone up. And what had happened is remember when I talked about the technicians stepping off the ladder? Well, we had that with somebody had a lot of time loss. We had a car accident with some time loss, all in the same year, right? So, and I think there was a lifting one too, with time loss. So again, it's really making sure that, that our managers and ownership understand that safety is part of making profitable operations. Management is not committed, right? Don't ensure the training is completed. They rush through it, checking off the box. Maybe they're not setting the example or enforcing safety rules. A lot of times sometimes if you have like in a manufacturing environment, especially, I got to get this job out the door, got to get it on the truck, right? We may, really get more focused on doing the job quickly rather than doing it safely. Mentioned earlier, assuming everybody understands English, or just, or culturally understands what you're talking about, making sure that you can provide materials in other language or you have interpreters, because safety is so important. And when my husband and I had our construction company, we had a lot of English as a second language, but each foreman or someone on the staff spoke Spanish so that they could communicate with the staff for safety. Okay, they don't have, so again, it's and that's what I said, is everybody has to either understand enough English or understand or be able to relate in another language so everybody is safe. So really kind of making sure your management is committed and don't incentivize them by not having no accidents. We know that doesn't work, but really just making sure that they understand that it is part of their job to ensure safety. Other pitfalls, you rush to hire workers without a plan, right? Oh my God, I need somebody tomorrow. Okay, but you haven't determined if that's the type of worker that you need. right? So, and not vetting that temporary agency, just picking up somebody off the internet. You need to make sure that you talk to that temporary agency, understand how their process works, have them come visit you, all of that, to make sure they're the right temporary agency for you. So I always like to say where you can get more guidance. Okay. There's a NOSH publication about protecting temporary workers for best practices. Remember, we can get those free consultations. Okay. And I did it before when I worked for a brewery, and it was great. I loved having the consultation, even though I'd already put my safety plan together. It was nice to have that other set of eyes to give some tweaks and guidance about how we could make it better. So with that, that's what I had for you today. Are there any questions in the chat box? I can't see the chat box.
Questions for Sylvia? Sylvia, we really appreciate your presentation today, and this is all very valuable information as we shift into more temporary workers and seasonal workers. It's there's a lot of things that do get missed, it seems, and this is excellent. I do see something in the chat that popped up, the CEU link. Brian, could you repost that one more time for us, please? We had a late comer,
I'll do it.
So okay, thank you. Yes, also somebody else said, Sylvia, can you share this in PDF format?
Sure, I'll send it to Brian, and that way you can have a copy of it, because it has some of those links in it too. So
certainly, here's some more coming here. Oh, perfect. Okay, we got the links popping up. That's excellent. Sylvia, we really appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Oh, I think there was one question about contractual language. Did that come up?
Yeah, let's see here. I'm seeing a bunch of stuff pop up. Is there any contractual language to include between the contractors? Let's see here. Do you see that there, Sylvia?
Yeah, so I'll use my example of when we were subcontractors to generals, right? When we are a construction company, and yes, you have contractual language around safety, right? You should always, so whether you're a subcontractor to a general, or if you're using that temporary agency, you might want to, again, put some contractual language into your agreement. So that again, so I think, and it's really kind of outlining maybe, who's responsible for what, right? Because that is that joint responsibility. Though, for when you're putting that into contracts, I would always say have your business attorney look at that. Let's see.
Other questions for Sylvia? Looks like folks do want to get that PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, well, I'll send that out afterwards, after we jump off the meeting today.
Send me an email, everyone who wants the PowerPoint.
Excellent. Well, Sylvia, we appreciate you joining today, and we are thankful for everyone who attended. If you'd like to reach out, you know where to get a hold of us. You can contact Brian or myself. And we will be having our next virtual safety summit on the second Wednesday of November, which falls on November 8th at 9 a.m. We hope you will join us. And until next month, be safe, work smart.
So,
thank you very much, folks.
Brett, we got a few minutes. If anybody wants to see the PowerPoint I just put together from recent DOSH data on both excavation and citations, I will share that with you right now, and I think it's pretty good. So
let's see it.
Hang on. So this is taken from some information that Amy Davidson got from me from DOSH. And I think it's very interesting because, as you all know, trenching and excavation has been a real emphasis. But the proof is in the numbers. So if you look at the numbers for total inspections and violations, there's been a 38% increase in total inspections from 2022 to 2023. and also a significant jump in violations, citations that were issued with violations. So that's something. They say emphasis, they mean emphasis. So take it to heart if you're doing trenching and excavation safety. Now here's a slide that shows a 70% increase in serious violation citations from 2021 to 2022. And that probably will compound in 2023 once the year is out. But again, when they say they're emphasizing this, you guys who are out there in trenches know that the inspections have significantly increased, and you should be aware of that when you go into a trench. All right, so the top 5 trenching violations in the last 2 years. Here they are. Protect employees in trenches. That's the biggie. 107 violations. That's how fatalities happen if you don't protect your employees in trenches. But all these are an indication of the top things you should look for and protect your employees from, and daily inspections as well. If anybody wants this PowerPoint, I can send it to you as well. And I got one more I'm going to show you. So these are DOSH inspections and citations in construction from 2018 to the end of August 2023. And I guess what I did was try to color code the inspections and the violations, and trying to show that we're running in 2023 inspections without violations is getting less and less. So that means there are more violations that are being cited in construction. So here we see the spread between general violations and serious violations or higher that are cited. And as you can see, 60% of the serious violations and higher represent that of the total, where general violations represent about 40%. So at the very bottom is the amount of penalties that have been issued per each year. And it's a significant number. So you don't want to be on the end of receiving one of those. So I think this is very interesting here. These are the inspection triggers. I mean, everybody in the back of their mind thinks that complaint inspections are a huge reason that bring DOSH out to your job site. Well, that's just not the case. They're based primarily on scheduled or programmed inspections, which is almost half of the inspections that they do. And then secondarily, referral inspections, representing about 26%. So I think that's interesting to note how and where the reasons for their inspections occur. Okay, top 10 serious violations and higher cited. This is 2023 year to date. So fall protection, ladders, fall protection. Should I say any more? Fall protection. Accident prevention program. Everybody should have one. If you don't, you need to have one, and you need to train to it so that your employees understand it. If it's sitting on a countertop collecting dust, that's not going to work if the inspectors come around. So this is the top 10 serious violations and top 10 general violations. Again, accident prevention program, first aid training, fall protection, and on and on and on. So that's just an indication of where you should probably focus your prevention safety efforts to avoid those kind of citations. And that is all I got.
Wow, that's great
Again, if
information.
anybody wants those, I got them and I'm happy to share them. And with that, I will stop sharing. And
Brian, this is Rhett. I personally would like to get that if you wouldn't mind emailing to me.
sure. Okay, hold on. Stop presenting.
All right. Well, that concludes it, folks, and a
Well,
great recap
I have
from Brian.
I have 2 cents to add to Brian's information there on the trenching emphasis.
Okay.
I have had 2 different customers get back a hold of me because they were quote unquote upset because they did not believe L&I could come back after they had done an opening, and both customers were hit with a repeat like 1 and 2 days later. When
Well,
L&I shows up, take them serious.
yeah. You can see they're writing